So, what was your reaction to this accusation from Russia?
Well, I think it's a sign of the desperation that Putin's regime has got because of the shambles of their illegal invasion of Ukraine and how wrong it's gone, what a terrible mistake it was. And if it wasn't for the fact that all of these issues are so serious, it's actually laughable. One could almost laugh at him about it. It's the most ridiculous claim. But it's typical of some of the comments that have been made. It's muddying the water, throwing out all sorts of false accusations, and one could sort of see a pernicious plot, possibly, to see it as a way of making allowances for anything they might do to cables under uh, the area of our economic zone, for example. For example, what happened to that cable going to the Shetland Islands. There was a
Mm.
Russian ship around at that stage, and it's muddying the waters. And what I do find extraordinary is it actually is a precise claim against a country. I don't think there's been another one like this actually pointing to. I mean, effectively, they're pointing to the United Kingdom and the Royal Navy specifically, and the other things have been much more generalizations or tied very much to Ukraine, like the business of a dirty bomb, which you could see as possibly a precursor to them doing something there. So I think it's worrying, but it is a laughable nonsense.
Mm.
And I think historically looking at it, I mean, Putin loves maritime affairs. I think his father was involved with the Navy. And I remember some 17 years ago being in number 10 when he was giving medals to my sailors for rescuing Russian sailors in the Far East who were stuck very, very deep, thousands of feet down, where he couldn't rescue them. And he was giving medals out at the time. And of course was concerned because he didn't trust us at that just before that. He hadn't allowed us to go and rescue his sailors from the Kursk, who all died because he wouldn't let us rescue them. So there's been a linkage with the Navy, but I find this quite extraordinary.
And as you say, I mean, very easy at the beginning to kind of see this as slightly comedic because it feels like such an absurd claim. But very struck by what you've just said. I mean, are you concerned that this could be some sort of pitch rolling propaganda for them to really focus now on Britain and try and sort of take some revenge?
Well, I think in all sorts of areas they're throwing out ludicrous claims and making ludicrous statements because it gives openings then for conspiracy theorists and also to make excuses for abhorrent behavior. And so I believe there is a slight concern, as I said, is this a few opening shots of nonsense because it means because things are going to get worse for Russia. There's no doubt about it because of the Ukrainian nonsense. That they do think about doing something to undersea cables, and then their line, of course, would be, well, they did this to us, we do it to them, rather like schoolboys. But so I do find that of slight concern, but I mean, it is clearly such a nonsense, the claim, and such a nonsense. And as you rightly say, I mean, it wasn't for the seriousness of the situation. One would just have to laugh at them. I think
Mm.
one would just stand and laugh at them. But there is that serious thread there.
And it's interesting because one of the lines from the Ministry of Defence rebuttal on this, and I think there's a lot in this. It says this invented story says more about the arguments going on inside the Russian government than it does about the West. I mean, what do your sources tell you about what is the mindset of the Russian military right now and the people around President Putin? Because however you look at it, it's been pretty disastrous for Russia so far.
Well, I mean, I have to say I don't have a specific line giving me detailed information on this. So it's just what I've drawn from various, from reading various things and my knowledge of knowledge of military affairs and things. But it's quite clear that Putin had managed to get some of his top people to agree to his what he called a special operation, and how much he had been fed nonsense about the ease of doing that, and how much was him blindly doing it anyway, is very difficult to know. But quite quickly it became clear what an appalling and dreadful mistake this was. And as things have got worse and worse with his military, so I think a number of the military, particularly middle ranking military, will have become aware that this is all a bit of a disaster, and how shoddy some of the military structures are within Russia. And therefore that will be permeating in various areas. Now, at the very top, I'm afraid with autocrats of this type, it's very difficult to ever replace them and very difficult to get the change. But there will be a huge level of concern, I believe, within all the middle structures of the military.
And final question to Lord West. I mean, we also learned recently that Russia was talking about doing some nuclear tests. We know that they have also been doing a false flag about dirty bombs with Ukraine, possibly to pitch role them using those type of equipment. Do you get the impression that Putin is becoming more and more desperate? And do you think he could do something which crosses that line in terms of using those kind of weapons?
Well, there's no doubt this loose talk of nuclear is extremely dangerous, but and he has a track record on nuclear. Going back a few years ago, he introduced what he called his strategy of de-escalation, and his strategy of de-escalation was that if Russia was losing a conventional war, and in those days when he was talking about it, it was on the basis probably of a war against NATO, which it would start to lose, that to de-escalate they would fire a nuclear weapon into somewhere in Europe or something. And that was his strategy of de-escalation. It didn't take into account what NATO's strategy was in response, I have to say. Highly dangerous. So this isn't new, this thought of maybe using a low-yield nuclear weapon, but it is extremely dangerous. And there's no doubt, he's a narcissist as well, he has been talking to himself in a way, and they do this, highly dangerous autocratic narcissists, they talk and talk about it because they're almost trying to justify it in their own mind.
Mm.
Can I do and all any talk of this is so dangerous. And one of the few areas within his military that he actually has spent a huge amount of money on, and I think is probably in fairly good nick, is that strategic part of his capability. He spent a lot of money on not just on current nuclear weapons, but actually he's come up with a couple of really horrible sort of doomsday type weapons, and you think, what on earth is he doing? Why on earth is he doing this? He's done this over the last 5 or 6 years or so, and I do find that extremely worrying.